All right, this is about how to choose your own vacuum state, your vacuum experience, the void. And this Professor Basil J. Hiley points out that we can choose our own vacuum, and this is how the noncommutativity works in the quantum algebra. And the key issue here is what his colleague, Sir Roger Penrose, emphasizes, that the weak equivalence principle in Einstein's relativity has a contradiction with quantum non-locality as a superposition. And so what Roger Penrose calls proto-consciousness is actually the quantum superposition that then, in terms of relativity, causes a retroactive, what he would call a collapse of the wave function as primitive causality or linear time for the inertial frame, the rest frame measurement at the speed of light. And in terms of relativity, the rest frame equivalence is relative to the observer. So it appears that time slows down or speeds up based on the observer as a particle goes towards the speed of light. But Basil J. Hiley is stating that, in fact, due to non-commutativity, there is a non-locality that's primary to the weak equivalence principle, and therefore there's no need to have any collapse of the wave function. There is no quantum measurement problem because the quantum algebra relies on Planck's constant squared, which takes into account the dispersion of energy that's non-local and superluminal. And so this is basically the equivalent of the quantum Zeno effect in quantum physics. And experimentally, it's demonstrated by the weak measurements, which means you don't have a collapse of the wave function because you maintain a weak correlation before the strong measurement of the relativistic inertial frame. And so the weak equivalence is maintained through quantum entanglement of the photon. And so the key issue here is, as Roger Penrose points out, is that mass as space-time actually originates from frequency. And so based on the transition frequencies that Heisenberg documented in the absorption spectrum, they are inherently non-commutative. And so this means the order of the frequency changes the value that when you add the frequencies together. And so this also means that all matter originates from light as frequency. And so, as Penrose points out, even as the universe accelerates, the matter eventually goes into black holes as singularities, which then have Hawking radiation. And that Hawking radiation is photons that then experiences no space-time, no linear primitive causality of linear time. And so they also experience no sense of size as space-time. And so then the process of the accelerating universe is the same process that's the Big Bang, that's creating the next universe. And this is what Nobel physicist Gerard de Hooft calls the eternal black hole, because it exists in the fifth dimension beyond size, and so it's pure time. And so Penrose calls it fundamental time. And this is the truth of non-locality, is that this dimension, this fifth dimension, is actually the eternal black hole that's the source of all matter from the future. And so through biology, it's accessed through sound, through listening. The perception of listening is known in medical science to be the last perception to exist when a person is alive, so they can hear even though they can't talk. But what we know from near-death experiences, as I posted in my previous video, is that there is a documented consistency of this supernatural music and a secret superluminal resonance to sound that physicist Gunther Nimps has also documented experimentally using the group velocity and the difference between the phase velocity and the time. And so a standard physicist, like in the Quora, I read the Quora answers by Victor Toth, and he's a standard physicist, so he will say that, well, if you're relying on group velocity versus phase velocity and frequency, then that's just a matter of the medium directly that's changing the slowing down the speed of light, and therefore you can have a superluminal signal because you're relying on a change in the medium. But this is not the point of Basil J. Hiley. Basil J. Hiley is stating it's not the medium. And the same with Alon Khan. Alon Khan's whole emphasis is that if you were trying to communicate with extraterrestrials, then how would you decide where you are in space-time? Because if you are trying to say where you are, you have to agree on coordinates or measuring units. And what he's saying is that light would be, as frequency, would be the common unit, because that's already what we use in quantum physics to define the wavelength as distance. We rely on frequency, and so the frequency is inherently non-commutative, and so therefore it has to be first measured in a non-local sense of these transition frequencies that Heisenberg discovered. So when you have two different frequencies, you're assuming a future and a past overlapping in this quantum algebra, or the vacuum state. So there's inherently a negative frequency as a time reversed signal. So this is what Alain Kahn calls 2-3 infinity, because you find it in music theory where the geometric dimension is actually 0. So in the vacuum state, you have it's converging to 0. It's always a positive number. But in terms of 4D space-time, it is 0. So it's in the fifth dimension. And so in terms of 2-3, if you have a wavelength of 0 to 1 as your fundamental tone or root tonic, then you can have a inherent overtone and undertone of 2/3 and 3/2. So obviously if you have a wavelength of 3/2 and that's greater than 1, then 0 to 1, and vice versa if you have a frequency of 3/2 from a wavelength of 2/3, and that's greater than the frequency is greater than the wavelength as an inverse ratio. And so it's just that basic paradox of the measurement as a rest frame. And so Professor Jean Brimont makes the same point, that the Bell inequality experiments finally proved Einstein wrong, that spooky action does exist. And spooky action at a distance is a phrase that was coined based on Pascual Jordan's double entendre of the word to produce in German. To produce also means to conjure, and therefore in quantum physics it's been experimentally proven that you can change the future and the past. You can change the past using like the what Olivier Costa de Beauregard first proposed, and then John Wheeler followed that up with the proposition that then became what's called the delayed choice experiment. And so Basil J. Hiley, using the Bohmian physics, is able to explain the delayed choice experiment without using any wave function collapse as a paradox. There's no need to have a collapse of the wave function. And it's all just due to the quantum algebra and basically what would be considered like coherence or decoherence as resonance of the frequencies. And so this paradox goes all the way back to Zeno and what is time, and it also goes back to the problem of entropy in physics, as Penrose emphasizes. And so the origin of entropy is from photons actually from frequency creating mass as space-time, and so therefore all the progress in with technology as physics is actually increasing entropy because it's going against the negative entropy that is the source of dark energy as anti-gravity, the gravitational potential that, as Roger Penrose says, is the secret power of the sun. And so this is what our ancient ancestors knew. They knew this secret of the power of the sun from the source of sound as listening, as meditation. And so this ancient secret was lost in order to create modern science, assuming the linear time as primitive causality that Einstein relies on for the weak equivalence principle. And this is why there's a deep denial about the ecological crisis, because science is our religion of technology, assuming this primitive causality of linear time. And so people are unable to confront what's called the Guy McPherson paradox of the increase in entropy in civilization, no matter what, as Tim Garrett documented, that there's always an increase in entropy through technology as an external measurement. So the source of that increase in entropy is actually this logical paradox between the weak equivalence principle in relativity, and that assumes a symmetric rest frame with a center point as a geometric mean for the measurement for the speed of light. So this is the origin of the psychological denial of the ecological crisis. It's actually from mathematics itself that assumes the irrational number as geometric mean. And so you find this in the switch to rectilinear architecture, the housing, that went against the circle in housing, because if you look at nature, it's very rare to have rectilinear lines in nature. You have everything is curving, and it's messy, and so people look at it and they think it's entropy. It looks like it's random and it's going against linear progress. So everybody wants to, in the modern westernized sense, they want to clean up nature and make it look like progress, so it has rectilinear lines. And this is quite ironic. Like the other day, I was shown an image of the Larsen C shelf iceberg that has it had a huge iceberg. I think it was like 1 trillion tons or something. But it was completely rectilinear. It had broken off, as a straight edge rectangle. And so it was hard to believe that it was produced by nature, as a rectilinear object. And so this goes all the way back to this idea of trying to square the circle. And what does that mean? And it turns out the origin of the circle as a sphere inherently has this time frequency uncertainty in the measurement. So when you measure time as a symmetrical symmetry, as a sphere is symmetrical, and so you're assuming, you have to assume a linear measurement of time against a wavelength. And the only way you can do that is by having projective geometry as an infinity point. And so this infinity point is a logical paradox that is assuming a external measurement with technology, and that's due to left brain dominance in humans. So when we are speaking with language, we're already assuming a right hand technology dominance. So that's how ancient this denial, this psychological denial, goes into this idea of linear time and external measurement and the sense of progress as symmetry, spatial symmetry. I'll just leave it at that, and thanks